Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And in today's installment, we shall be discussing perhaps the most famous episode of the entire series. Episode 49, Cartoon Buffoon, or as it's known in the Japanese original, a new anime program, DDD of the Stars. This episode was originally released in Japan on September 21st, 2002 as the 49th episode, whereas the English dub done by 4Kids was released on September 20th, 2003 as the 47th episode. This was likely due to the change between the release dates of other episodes as opposed to anything wrong with this specific episode itself, which, as I stated earlier, has had quite an impact on the wider internet animation community. But we'll talk about that later, as it seems appropriate to start with the episode proper to see if it holds up well or if its reputation is somewhat overinflated, as is often the case. The episode opens to a close-up of a picture of Tiff with a jump rope, as the camera pans out as we see Tiff showing her brother Kirby and the Cappy Kids a flip book, which, if you don't know, is an old style of animation that uses a series of static images that literally flips through itself to simulate the appearance of movement. An interesting little detail is that Tiff's drawings here closely resemble the concept art of the actual show, which is a neat little detail you might not otherwise notice. Tiff explains this basic concept and shows it off to them, which amazes all the kids with this optical illusion, and honestly, she explains it very well. Interestingly, there is a minor animation error in this scene where Iroh's mouth is for some reason duplicated and just floating there. Kinda odd, but admittedly hard to notice unless it's pointed out. Returning to the plot, we see that Escargoon has been watching the little children as the king comments on the cartoon, with the snail saying it is surprisingly easy, while the king says it gives him an idea. We then see Kirby leaping in joy at this whole affair before we cut to the jazzy intro. After that jazzy intro, we cut to the king's throne room, where we see the enemy sales guy talking to the king. He compliments the monarch, but Dee cuts him off and tells him to look at this. He then tells the sniveling Escargoon to start the old school film using a movie player. Initially, there is an error as the animation is so blurry that it is unrecognizable to the sales guy, which, greatly confuses him. The king, shocked at this, angrily yells at Escargoon to fix this blatant issue. Escargoon goes to fix the camera issue, and it is revealed to be a poorly drawn animation of King Dedede performing jump rope. It's honestly rather ugly, but the king is happy due to his egotism, but gets sad when the animation ends quickly. Escargoon explains that it takes thousands of drawings to make an animation of even such a short length, and it is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the characters refer to their animation project as an anime, rather than a cartoon, which is the term used in the English dub. It's worth explaining that the term anime in Japan is really just a catch-all term for animation, whereas in other countries, anime specifically refers to only animation produced in Japan. It's kind of weird how someone considered that this was a flaw and that 4Kids needed to remove it. Because, I mean, even back then, anime had become popular enough that I think it was okay to leave that term in. Anyway, resuming with the plot, the enemy sales guy warns the king that animation takes time and lots of money, something that sounds likely familiar to artists of the independent variety. The king then offers a deal that enemy will pay for the show, which they will then broadcast. The enemy sales guy hesitates, but the king declares that they'll make an animation sensation as he and Escargoon laugh evilly before we cut to Cappytown, where we see the king has put up a sign. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, it reads, Wanted, cartoon staffs. Yes, plural, DDD Productions. 4Kids, in what is a rare instance of their changes actually fixing something, decided to airbrush the S out. So, good job there, 4Kids. You managed to fix a problem for once. The townspeople look at this. Professor Curie reads it, and Kawasaki says arrogantly that if he can make a souffle, then he can animate. In the Japanese original, he asks if anime is different from hirame, same, or hakaname, which are the Japanese words for flounder, shark, and seaweed. Honestly, the pun doesn't really work in English, so I can kind of understand why 4Kids would remove it. The mayor snarks that he might even be a better animator than he is a chef, which is slightly demeaning, but whatever. Chief Bookham's wife says that the king is producing an animation series. Hannah bemoans that the king will likely do a self-insert, but Mabel says that show business is still show business, regardless of how demeaning it is. Professor Curie suggests that maybe it could have educational value, while Tiff says that making a cartoon takes a lot of drawings. Mayor Len Blustergas ignores her and says it would be good to have work in the town, while Chief Bookham says it's fine as long as it's legal. We then cut back to the castle where we see the king has built a small animation studio with, of course, his face plastered onto it. Escargoon talks to the people, welcoming them into the animation industry, and tells them to bring their own pencil. The king hypes up the process as we cut to the king's office, as he says that he is the most important person as the producer. Spikehead then asks what a producer is/does, and Iroh says that they don't really do anything, which isn't entirely true, but given that this is King Dedede, that statement is more accurate than it normally would be. Escargoon snarks that said statement is correct. The king, enraged, punches him away and says the producer is in charge of everything and everyone, and then makes Escargoon the director. And the king asks the crowd of Cappies if there are any questions. The mayor walks up to him and asks a question. In the Japanese original, he asks what they are doing, while in the English dub, he asks for a coffee break. In either version, this gall causes King Dedede to slump into his chair as if he broke his back. Tiff then actually says something productive and says that they first got to do a production meeting, which shocks the pair of buffoons. We see then having a production meeting occur in a room while the horrible Berta Corey keeps count of something that's really not important. Tiff says that they gotta come up with their target audience, the budget, what the story about, and who the characters involved in. The king says that he already has an idea and proposes DDD Man, much to the chagrin and disgust of Tiff and the others, as it is honestly just a poorly drawn self-insert. In the Japanese original, the king and Escargoon deny that this is a self-insert, but let's be honest, pretty obvious, and even they are eventually forced to admit this by the end. 4Kids remove this whole thing, and frankly, nothing much of value was lost. Though the Japanese original does make him seem a little more stubborn, which makes sense. Tiff says that this is the sloppiest character she's ever seen. The king challenges her to design better, and after thinking a bit, she comes up with an idea and draws a Kirby, which amazes the Cappies, with Professor Curio saying that the character has all the traits of a great hero, though Isn't that basically the same thing the king did? Regardless, Tuff says his sister idea is amazing, especially for a hero, but Tiv says that now that they've come up with a hero, they gotta come up with a premise. The plot, setting, etc. Escargoon, fed up with this, says, "Why doesn't she make the script?" But the king grabs him by the eye stalks and says that he wants DDD Man as the main protagonist. Escargoon says that she'll be his assistant. Tiff takes offense at just being a mere assistant to the king, but in retaliation, Escargoon threatens her. In the Japanese original, the sniveling snail says that if she doesn't complete the script by tomorrow, she shall receive the death penalty, which is quite extreme. The English dub, likely to make the episode more child-friendly, saw 4Kids change this to having him say that she better do it or she'll hear from him. Both are fine, though I do kind of like the English dub just a bit more. We then cut to that night where we see Tiff burning the midnight oil. Strangely, we see another change between versions here, as we see that Tiff's typewriter has letters on it that 4Kids, for some baffling reason, saw fit to airbrush out. Honestly, it seems like a waste of effort. They were literally just letters, and I don't see why they would have to remove it. Regardless, Tiff is having issues writing the script. Her mother gives her some encouragement before wishing that she could help her with the script. Her father, Cerebrum, then suggests that she put in a thrilling brawl, as people like that kind of thing. Tuff agrees, saying that a thrilling chase sequence would also be good. Tiff likes the ideas, and Cerebrum walks over to his daughter and says that they gotta make an exciting setting, with Tuff suggesting that they have it take place in space. Tiff says that there is no way she can write this type of story, but her brother encourages her, and her father rolls up his sleeves and promises to help her out. And we then cut to the next day as we see that Tiff's father is sleeping with prominent eye bags as his wife puts a blanket over him. We then cut back to the meeting room as we see the others being explained the plot by Tiff. Everyone seems happy except the king and Escargoon. The sniveling snail asks if he can fire her, but the king yells at him, saying that he wanted to be the main character, but Escargoon whispers that they can change that later. Tiff then says that now they gotta cover the storyboard, which confuses the dumb duo, as she explains what a storyboard exactly is, and which is basically just a way that they plan out the story to a certain extent, which amuses the king, who then hits Escargoon over the head after Tiff explains that there's going to be a fight. Tiff says that they're going to need a whole team to animate, but the king ignores this as he says that they have the best team to do this with. We then cut to Kirby, who is just struggling to draw even a barely decent circle. We see all the drawings being done by the various cappies like Gus and Samo. Escargoon says that today everyone is working on character sketches, with the focus currently being on DDD Man. The king seems happy at first, until he walks past Chief Bookums and angrily grabs the sketch, which, despite Bookums' earnest efforts, just looks absolutely horrible. In pure rage, he tears it up and stomps it into the ground. Escargoon says that they're only drawing what they see. Tiff tries to change the subject by encouraging the Cappies to show what they've done so far, with the Mayor, Iroh, Tuggle, and Melman the Mailman all showing the king their just frankly horrible art, which Dee Dee bats away each time with a rather clever remark for each. He then turns to see Kawasaki's particularly bad drawing, and in pure shock faints and falls onto his back upon the ground. Tuff makes the fairly obvious observation to Tiff that the drawings are all awful. Tiff said that she knew that this was a bad idea, but Escargoon orders her to get rid of these no talents. Tiff points out that he's the director, but instead of taking accountability, Escargoon proceeds to give Tiff the role of animation supervisor, essentially putting her in charge of fixing all these horrible drawings. We then see Tiff and the others working into the night when the terrible bird Hikori walks past, which astounds Tiff, who asks what he's really doing here being employed. The horrible bird Hikori says that he is part of production, and specifically part of quality control, which Tiff says that they should hire someone who actually knows what quality is, as she's had to fix all sorts of just absolutely awful drawings. We then cut to the Cappies coloring Kirby drawings. Escargoon and the king walk through this area as the snail explains the concept to the king. He seems happy until he sees Ladylike painting Kirby. He's about to lunge at her, but Escargoon pulls him aside and assures him that they'll fix it later, much to his consternation. We then see Buttercup and Hannah discussing what shade of pink Kirby is, like if he is just pink or fuchsia. Buttercup suggests that they look at Kirby, who just so happens to be in the same area, and the two agree that he's just plain old pink. We cut to another area where we see numerous paintings, as we see that Escargoon explains that this is where they draw the backgrounds for the animation. Dr. Yabui says that they are out of paint, to which Kawasaki says he has something that they could use, and shows, much to the doctor's shock, a ketchup and mayonnaise bottle. The king compliments a particularly appealing and appetizing background. Kirby jumps up, however, to try and eat the background, but an annoyed Escargoon stops him. We then go to the animation room proper, where we see Professor Kiryu and Gengu, the store owner, doing the, old school method of cell animation, as he puts a cell over the background. The king, much to his chagrin, goes over and wants to do a picture and presses the button and laughs at his success. But then, much to everyone's chagrin, Kirby messes up the next slide, and Kiryu has sort of a mini nervous breakdown, saying that he can't work in these conditions! No! While Gengu says it's no good. We then see Escargoon and the king walk down a hallway, as the king complains that he wants to be in the cartoon, but Escargoon assures him that it'll be fixed later, and he can leave it up to him. We then cut to Mabel and Tiff, who are busy editing all the pieces together. She noticed that some of the frames lack color, especially the ones that Tiff gave her, and Tiff says that they're all very new at this. Mabel says that while she's not a professional editor, she shall take her best shot, which is frankly the best anyone can do in this situation. We then cut to that night as we see Escargoon, the King Dedede, and Waddle Dees sneak into the studio, where we see everyone has, due to the stress and hard work they've been up to, fall asleep in their chairs. We see Escargoon comment on the subpar Kirby drawings, but before we see him replace all their hard work with their own drawings, claiming that it's the privilege of a quote-unquote director, as the two snicker at their evil, diabolical plans. We then cut to the king's throne room, where we see the enemy sales guy ask the king how the animation is going. Escargoon admits that they are a bit behind schedule, with the king asking for a bit more time. The enemy sales guy says it's fine, but if it doesn't air in time, then the contract is broken and they must pay up, which in the Japanese original is specified to be 990 billion D-den, which is a lot. 4Kids removed the specific number stated out loud, but they still showed his calculator, which shows the same amount, and oh boy. The king, understandably shocked at this, falls to the ground before jumping up and saying that enemy knows that they can't afford that sort of money, to which the sales guy says that then he better have the episode air on time. We then cut to the next day as Tiff reacts in shock and says that there's no way that they could possibly animate the episode by the day after tomorrow. The other Cappies, all with prominent bags under their eyes, complain that this is wrong. Mabel says that said deadline is impossible, to which Escargoon dismisses her as just negatively thinking. Kawasaki says that they've spent 3 nights here working nonstop, with Chief Bookham saying this violates union law. DDD's response to this is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he dismisses their concerns by saying that this country is an absolute dictatorship and an axis of evil. This is a twofold reference. First, it is a reference to the Axis powers of World War II, which included Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And second, it is an allusion to George W. Bush, who referred to foreign countries the U.S. opposed to as being part of an axis of evil. In the English dub, this was changed to him saying that he's in charge and what he says goes and tells them to get busy. Both versions are fine enough, though I must admit that the cultural reference in Japan was a little bit neat. In either case, in both versions, he begins yelling into the camera. Roar! We then see Kirby being woken up by the terrible Takori, who rudely commands him to wake up, as there's a deadline to meet. What a twat, right? We then see a montage of the animators all working really hard to meet the deadline. We see Tiff, Tuff, Chief Bookums, the Mayor, Len Blustergas, Iroh, Spikehead, Melman the Mailman, Professor Curio, Gengu the toy store owner, and Mabel. In the Japanese original, this scene is a little longer as we also see Ladylike, Buttercup, Hannah, Kawasaki, and Dr. Yabui. Honestly, I like the Japanese original a bit better, as it just conveys all the sheer overwhelming amount of work that they're being forced to do. And it is a real shame that 4Kids felt it necessary to shorten it. In either case, Deity and Escargoon walk in. The king, ungratefully ignorant, calls them all lazy, to which Chief Bookums take offense, and the mayor says that they have been working as fast as they can. The king threatens to whack them with a hammer to get them to work even harder, but Escargoon, walking over to the window and looking at the sunrise, says that they better just air what they got and hope for the best. Tiff says that they can't do that as it's nowhere near finished. The king says that they have to and they got 20 minutes, but Takori says it's impossible as they are too far behind. And the king says he'll talk to the sponsor. We then cut to the throne room as we see the enemy sales guy saying that either they'll get their show or they'll get their dough, which is basically getting paid. The king answers rather depressingly that they'll get something alright, but overcomes the hesitation and says Dreamland better be ready for a show. We then cut to Capitan where we see various people waiting for the cartoon air. It is here that we see the next change between versions, as when they come to Doron, who has escaped his cell but is for some reason still sticking around in prison. In the Japanese original, he's holding a glass of wine, but 4Kids, which sought to remove all references to drugs and illicit material, changed it to just being a cup of water. Though admittedly, still being in that type of glass means it's very obviously something else. Not really that much of a major issue. We then cut to the studio where we see everyone preparing to read their lines live. The king bursts in and explains that they gotta read the script to match the lip movements. Tiff points out how they haven't really rehearsed, but the king says they got no time for that, with Escargoon telling them to work with them, and before they can argue, Tuff says that it's starting! Ooh! We see Kawasaki run over to the projector and put in the opening, and there are a lot of changes right off the bat. In the Japanese original, the opening of the cartoon mimics the Kirby March opening song rather than the 4Kids version with unique visuals and lyrics that are sung by DDD, with the standard episode title being The Plump Visitor, which is a reference to the Japanese name of the first episode. He's here, the Pink Visitor. In the English dub, this is changed to having the king sing a parody of the English opening, Kirby, Kirby, Kirby. What I find most interesting is that it actually uses scenes that were cut from the English dub of episode 6, Unreality TV, which is an episode I've already reviewed but was given a false copyright strike by PitMonkX, and don't worry though, I'll re-upload it in time. Back to the review, we see Tiff realize that King Dedede has changed their animation. The king chuckles while Escargoon saying it's the director's cut. From there, we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, there are some small sponsors at the beginning, including Holy Nightmare Company, DDD Inc., and Holy Nightmare Apparel. The English dub changes this to a picture of the king's head and the Nightmare logo, altered to more closely resemble the Walt Disney logo. Both versions do a good enough job at conveying the sort of corporate greed that's on display here. Though, as an American, I do admit that the Walt Disney Company does hold more weight than some regular apparel company. In both versions, we then see Bookums, the mayor, Sir Ibram, and Lady Like running with tapes up to the projection room, with the mayor having the wrong one while Lady Like has the correct one, and it's just all a bunch of busy stuff. Then we see the episode, in quotes, start, and we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, the king babbles nonsense meant to mock Kirby, who is, a baby and marbles. Whereas in the English dub, it's largely silent with him doing just a regular line, and oh gosh, it's just horribly drawn. We see Tiff, Tuff, and Meta Knight mumble about the state of things. Meta Knight says that he's very nervous as he's never acted before, but Tiff assures him that he'll be fine. So the king arrives in Dreamland as we see the people voicing poorly drawn sheep, which are then consumed by a poorly drawn character of a giant Kirby. A poorly drawn Tiff and Tuff realize what is going on as we see the king and Escargoon voicing stuff before Tiff points out to Kirby what the king is up to and denounces him before Kirby begins chasing after the king, who seems to sort of like floss away. We then see Escargoon and the king talk, where for some reason it becomes suddenly very anime. Interestingly, these closely resemble the art style in F-Zero GP Legend, which is another anime based on a Nintendo video game series. Whether this is an intentional similarity or a coincidence due to them both using an anime aesthetic is unknown, though some have speculated that the same person who animated that series worked on this scene. Tiff points out how they changed the script, with their brother saying that them being good guys is not exactly realistic. The demon Kirby bursts into the castle and begins attacking Tiff and her family, with Sir Ibram taking offense to his depiction being far too fat, before his wife reminds him to stay on script. We then see Chief Bookums and the mayor running down the hill from the demonic Kirby, but in the end they are crushed to death as the two voice actors comment on the poor animation. But we then see King and Escargoon push them aside rather violently to start with their lines, which form a large diatribe. Interestingly, the face Dedede makes when he says the line, "Oh come now, little old me a hero, surely you jestin'," would actually eventually be referenced in a future Kirby game. In the 2016 3DS game, Kirby Planet Robobot, there are these collectible stickers that you collect throughout the game, and they contain a lot of neat little references, and specifically, there was one that was a reference to this scene done in the doodle style. Nice to see that the anime is mentioned in the game, even if it's only in a minor, offhanded manner. We then see Tuff ask his sister where all the cool action went, to which she explains that they rewrote her script to just have them talk to each other. Sir Ibram laments that an animated show should be animated, with his wife saying that all that is moving is their mouths. Which, if you don't know, is a cost-saving measure that a lot of early anime would often do. Tiff says that it looks like they're finally moving, but her mom points out that they're not actually moving, rather the camera just panning as they just stand still and talk. Cerebrum says this whole production is rather second-rate, but Escargoon orders them to all stop talking as his favorite part of the episode starts. We see the demonic Kirby about to stomp on King Dedede. Escargoon tells the king to suck it up, which Tiff bemoans as they're just stealing her statements and just a flagrant example of a lack of originality. Kirby breathes fire, which the king inhales to become... And yes, I just showed that scene because it's the only equivalent to a ability in the episode. And frankly, while Fire Deity actually sounds like somewhat of a decent concept, it's never really been used in the games at all, which makes sense. It is just flagrant plagiarism, as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Meta Knight says Fire Deity before muttering about how even he cannot make that name sound cool, whereas in the English dub, he mutters that he would never say that. In both versions, it perfectly portrays the knight's bamboozlement at what just happened. We then see the next scene being further lazy as it reverts to black and white and doesn't even have a real background. The king notes this, and Kawasaki explains that they simply didn't have the time to finish this part of the episode, to which the king says it doesn't matter, as the acting shall carry it. Escargoon points out the absurdity of this, as no one could act with these terrible scribbles and make it look good in any reasonable manner. Interestingly, in the Japanese original, it's even worse, with production notes on some of the images, with one in particular reading, Shadow Don Boo Poo. 4Kids removed these as they were basically just gibberish. Fire Deity thinks and says he'll destroy Kirby. We then see Kawasaki very nervous about his line. Tiff asks what's wrong and it's revealed that he's voicing Kaboo. Honestly, him being super nervous makes more sense in the Japanese original, since they are, ironically enough, both voiced by the noted Japanese voice actor Nobuo Tobita. But since in the English dub they're two different voice actors, the joke doesn't really work. Anyway, Kawasaki ends up being worried for nothing, as he does a really good job and he collapses, relieved for it to be over. Tiff says that he did great and should consider acting, which raises his spirits a bit. King Deity leaps upon the warp star and approaches the giant demonic Kirby. He's also upset at Escargoon for having to ad-lib this. Fire Deity, in essence, I guess, defeats Kirby, but we see that the last scene of this quote-unquote cartoon was all drawn by Kirby, and it's somehow even worse than what we've seen up to this point, much to the chagrin of everyone else. And in what is the final scene change between versions, it is significantly longer in the Japanese original. We then see the king realize that all this hard work was not worth it, as the cartoon ends up destroyed. An ending that is arguably as you would expect. We then cut to the throne room, where it's revealed that the audience rating was 0.001%, in which the final script changed between versions, which the 4Kids removed that direct statement. The enemy sales guy says that the contract required an animation of professional quality, and the dejected king says they gotta pay them now, right? The sales guy shows him the bill, much to the king's shock. Escargoon says that they will make 20 free episodes if they forgive their debts, and the shrewd sales guy takes them up on this stellar deal. We then cut to Capitan, where we see Tiff and the others talk about how happy they are not to be working for the king anymore, with Chief Bookham saluting anyone who has the ability to make a good cartoon, as it's not easy, though the mayor says it wasn't all bad, it was a little fun. The conversation comes to an end when the new animation comes out, and it's somehow of even lower quality than the first episode, as we see the king is doing all the voice acting. The photo goes out, and it's revealed that Escargoon and Waddle-Dees are picking up all the slack of the now gone Cappies. The people laugh at the pitiful animation, with Tiff saying that it's one of those things that is so bad that it's good, like The Room by Tommy Wiseau. The Cappies laugh at this, and the episode ends with a visual gag of Kirby, who is temporarily reduced to little more than line work, before the fourth wall breaks and a painter brush recolors his body and calms Kirby down. A fitting fourth wall break ending for this kind of episode. Normally, I would now talk about the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts, but I think this time around it would be better to briefly discuss this episode's impact on the fandom and the wider internet for just a bit. Well, firstly, due to the nature of how poorly drawn some of the actual images in the episode was, it spawned quite a number of memes that poke fun of it. But of far more substance is that on February 13th, 2018, it was the subject of an animation collab, which is part of a wider movement that sees various artists reanimate scenes of a specific subject matter. They're a cool concept, but sadly are not really marketed all that well. I mean, I wasn't even aware of it until it was officially released, and I would have known that had I known about it, I would definitely have told my brother about it since he's trying to practice his art in animation. So, yeah. Regardless, it was an amazing effort, and 300 plus artists of all skill levels collaborated to reanimate this episode. This included such people as Julian Chen, Explosive Egg, Manny Burdon, Katja Kranger, Super Paro Waffles, Nick Kalmer, Samuel, Sleepy Kitten, Ebotnik, Elizabeth Lee, and many, many more. And it was very successful, getting 4.1 million views and 25,000 subscribers on just 2 videos. So, sadly, for a brief time, this video was taken down by an illegitimate copyright strike. The exact party responsible is not exactly certain. Some say it was Nintendo itself, others say it was a different third party or slash troll that was pretending to be Nintendo. Personally, I think it was Pitmonk who has done that to me as well as other people in the Kirby community, but yeah.
How can I help you, King DDD?
I need a monster to claw with that there Kirby.
That's what we do best at NME.
You better get it with a money back guarantee.
Luckily, though, it was restored, and even when it was offline for a bit, it was uploaded to Dailymotion and several other sites. So if you want to watch it, you can, and trust me, it's definitely worth a watch. Personally, however, I think it's time we start with the positives, and frankly, there are quite a few. I thought that the episode's plot was just astoundingly good, and the thematic device was really well implemented. And it showed many of the problems found in the animation industry, the extremely long workdays, people being forced to sleep at their desks, the unreasonable demands at all levels, including not only the sponsors themselves, but also the directors and middle management. And also the creative differences between artists and other middle management people. I'm sure anyone in the actual industry can relate to these things and more. I also thought that the episode had a lot of good character moments, like when Meta Knight, the normally stalwart person, being nervous about acting, Kawasaki, having issues with his own acting, the little interactions between Hannah when it came to Kirby's colors. I just think there's a lot of neat little moments that even if you're not necessarily that into the industry, you can relate to that. Plus the DDD anime, which is so bad it was amazing, both of them. But is it a perfect episode with no flaws at all? Well, I know this is going to be a bit of a hot take, but there are some noteworthy flaws that the episode does have that I think are, for the record, worth mentioning. Firstly, some of the critiques of the animation industry shown off in this episode are a bit inaccurate. I mean, for one example, no one has actually been threatened with the death penalty to do their job, and people haven't actually had to record their lines live and unscripted for over a decade before the airing of this episode, and this is 2023, so it's even more out of date if you're watching it now. I also thought there were a few animation errors, as well as some changes between versions that kind of broke some of the criticisms in a bit of a way, but I think that this doesn't really ruin the episode, though, as all these problems are rather minor, and I still think it's definitely in the top 5 of all the episodes in the series. I mean, it's not my favorite. I got a few that I think are a little better, but it's definitely up there, and definitely worth a watch next time you binge the entire Kirby Right Back at You series. And anyway, I am the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And subscribe if you found this kind of video interesting. Peace out and have a nice day.